it's a helpful example to think about intersections. This is why I think, in response to Joanne's comment earlier, why I think that this is not just made up, that this is how this works. I don't know if you recognize this woman or the picture of this woman. This is Sarah Bartman. She was called Venus Hottentot. She was a slave taken from South Africa, from a group of people. I can't remember what they called themselves, but she had very pronounced bodily features, right? And the women in this group of people from South Africa all had this body shape. Okay, so large buttocks, right? Large breasts, and you don't see this in the picture, but very pronounced labia on the vagina. Okay, and this was an effort. So scientists were very interested in this group of people. But why were they interested in this group of people? Because they were trying to determine a way of arranging people hierarchically, right, according to body type, right? So their assumption was this body shape demonstrated that these people were lower in a sort of social hierarchy than, well, who was at the top? Whites, because these were European, primarily, scientists, right, who were doing this. So this particular woman was taken and put on display in what we could call, quite accurately, a human zoo, right? And she was put on display, and people would come, if you hit the next.
Where was this? In what country?
This is in Europe, primarily. If you go back.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, the other way. Back. You're here.
Oh, I see. I'm not. Yeah, I'm using enter rather than the arrows.
Let's go back here quickly. The objectifier's gaze is literally looking at another living being and turning that living being into an object. And so this person, right, was put on display like an animal in a zoo, and was looked at. Why? Only not because they were interested in her as a human being, but because they were interested in her body parts. Right? She was at the end of her life. When she died, she was dissected. Right? We never lose that language when we talk about human beings. We never say we dissect somebody. At best, we say they have an autopsy. Right? But we don't dissect. And if that's not the worst of it, her breasts, her buttocks, and her labia were all put on display in the museum in France until the 1980s. Until the 1980s. Okay, she lived at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, 1790s to 1820 something. Okay, all right. So look, here's how this works. Here we have a human being who, in very many ways, is being treated like an animal. Other animals are put on display, are the object of the objectifier's gaze, like in a zoo. They are disassembled. Their bodies are disassembled, right? Both while they're alive and after they're dead. While they're alive, we look at certain animals and we say we are enamored by them or find them interesting because of the size of their teeth or the color of their fur and so on, right? That's not the only reason we are. I recognize that. People have genuine interest in the sort of life histories and natural histories of non-human animals. But when you think about going to a circus, or when you think about the vast majority of, there have been studies, I should speak carefully here, there have been studies that have demonstrated that people learn very little when they go to zoos, right? They sort of run through, look at the animals, they don't read very much about them, right? And so they ooh and ah over the ones that are particularly large or particularly scary or particularly ugly, right? Again, that's sort of from our own perspective. But much like this woman is being sort of disassembled by the objectifier, you can see that these are old prints, right? They are looking at her body parts, right? And then after she died, just like with animals, we cut them apart after they die, if we were going to eat them. Her body was cut apart, right? This is an example of the intersection of oppression, of the way that we think about animals and then how that is applied to the way we think about certain kinds of people, right? And this is a historical example. But we do this now. So if you would just let's go to the patriarchy, right? Because we talked a little bit about capitalism. We can go back to that. But let me talk about PETA. Okay? PETA drives me crazy. Not in a good way.
Is it a PETA peeve? I'm sorry.
It's a PETA peeve, yes. Right? Pet peeve. PETA pet peeve, right? I'm going to give you an example again of how, and this is what I think hopefully will speak even more directly to the point that you made, Joanne, earlier. And that is, here's an example of a group that is trying to advocate on behalf of non-human animals, but the way they do it is highly questionable, in my mind. Right? So here we have a group of people. This is actually, I actually don't have any problem with this. I think this is actually quite creative. Right? We have a group of people of all different body shapes, of different races, of different genders, together protesting the fur campaign. The idea is, I'd rather be naked than wear animal fur. Okay? If this is all that happened, that people organized locally and did this kind of thing, that would be fine, right? But it's what happens after this. We start getting the national campaign now, right? Keep going. Here. And another. And another. Stop here. So we have women's bodies, highly sexualized images of women's bodies being used in the service of this fur campaign. I would submit to you that this will never work to end the exploitation of non-humans. First of all, it's like softcore porn, right? Softcore, right? And so, I mean, where are we looking? Or the average person who's looking online at these images, right? What are they stumbling on? So the message is kind of lost because of a certain way that we think about, especially men think about women and women's bodies, right? And that's what this image is trying to play on. Oh, men think about women as sexualized objects.
It's very effective in selling products, so why not here?
But the question is it effective here, right? And
They assume so.
They assume so, right? They surely did. And even if it were effective in the short term, right? The problem is it continues to exploit a group of marginalized people. And what I'm arguing is doing so only